Hi, friends. This is a sermon called Marks and Matriarchs. It is based on the 16th chapter of Acts, verses 9 to 15, a story of Paul and the conversion of Lydia. It is being preached at Faith United Church in Hamilton and Yellowknife United Church in the Northwest Territories on May the 25th, 2025. Can I speak to someone in charge? Can I speak to, one of the men? This woman's statement caught me completely off guard. It was a busy weekend at the funeral home, and she was a family member who wasn't happy about something. I don't remember what. There are 1,000 details that go into a funeral service, and that means that 1,000 things can go wrong. And I remember that this moment unfolded in the height of the COVID lockdowns, when many people were unhappy much of the time. Whatever this issue was, she didn't want to talk to me about it. She wanted the boss, the person in charge, one of the men, she said. But the thing is that on that particular day, the person in charge wasn't a man. None of us were men, actually. The senior funeral director on duty was a woman. I was the junior director, a woman. And there were a few funeral director assistants floating around and a couple of receptionists, all women. Downstairs in the embalming room, there were two more funeral directors. Both of them were women. And all of us were suited up, wearing our ties, doing the very hard work of running a funeral home, which is pretty common these days, given that something like 80% of new licensed funeral directors are women. But when this unhappy client pictured the boss, she imagined a man. As usual, right? This sort of everyday sexism happens still with irritating frequency to just about every woman I know in every professional setting I can think of. I've been asked by drunken uncles whether the wedding I performed was really legal, given that it was done by a lady priest. I've been ignored by religious officials who will only deal with men. I've been called sweetheart, again, priests, while directing funerals. I've been hit on by clients in the casket room. I've frozen my pantyhose-clad legs off at cemeteries because skirts were mandatory, and I've been asked about my menstrual cycle with respect to my ability to handle a deceased person of another faith. Once I had a lawyer, while sitting in on a funeral arrangement, literally pat me on the head and assure the family I was serving that they would be in good hands with this pretty young lady. I'm shockingly used to it, but still, her comment stung. One of the men? So much for girl power. Women may have been running the show that day, but it was clear that we weren't in charge in everyone's eyes. The Apostle Paul was used to finding the men in charge, and he probably expected to network a bit with the boys that day when he arrived in Philippi. After Saul's dramatic conversion from persecutor to follower, Saul turned Paul, spent a year up north growing the church in Antioch, but lately he's come south again, most recently returning to Jerusalem to address the religious council that formed there. Paul has been defending the Christian mission and also the ministry to the Gentiles, and he is used to speaking to the higher-ups in all the places where he goes. He preaches in the synagogues, he argues with religious elders, he challenges the religious establishments. He has just circumcised a man named Timothy and brought him into the mission, which was a job that was usually done by, a rabbi. Even in these early days of his ministry, Paul has assumed a great deal of authority. He knows he's important. He deals with important people. So, when a Macedonian man appears to Paul in a vision and pleads with him to come to Macedonia and help us, Paul assumes that there will be important people there, too. But there's a problem. Macedonia is a Roman center. It's full of pagans, not Jews. And when Paul gets to Philippi, along with his friend Silas, he finds no synagogue, no Jewish leaders, no Jewish Christians, no Jews at all, actually. Who is he supposed to be helping, and who is he going to convert? Paul searches high and low for any faithful people who might be receptive to his message, but the only ones he can find are a ragtag group of women. And they're not even in the city. They're down at the river, outside of the city gates, on the edges. And they're not Jews. They might be pagans, probably Gentiles, or a mix of both. But Paul doesn't see anyone else to talk to. And there must be some reason why he had the dream to come to this faraway place. It's taken him days to get there, and there don't seem to be any men in charge. So maybe it's the women. And it looks like they're praying. It's worth a shot. Lydia and her friends watch as the two men approach. The women have just finished their prayers, and Lydia takes a step towards the water's edge to try in vain to scrub some of the purple dye from her fingers. Purple is all over Lydia's fingers all the time because of the fabrics that she sells. Purple is an important color. Lydia's customers are important people. She makes a good product. She knows it. And the men she sells to, religious officials, royalty, that kind of thing, they pay her well to do it. But it's not easy. Lydia has had to fight so hard to get where she is. She owns her own home. She makes a living for herself. And most of the other women in Philippi, well, most women anywhere in those days, are not able to do what she does. She finds that men are always underestimating her. And surely these foreign men, these obviously Jewish men heading their way right now, they will be no different. Lydia dries her hands and stands upright. Her guard is up, as it always is around strangers. She has earned her place in this community. It's been hard won, and she doesn't want to take any crap. "What can I do for you?" she asks. They were a strange pair, these mismatched messengers, Lydia and Paul, both a little wary as they size each other up. We aren't given a lot of information about the exchange between Paul and Silas, Lydia and her friends on that day in Philippi, but we can piece together a few clues. Paul and Lydia would not naturally have engaged in conversation. Men from away didn't just walk up to unaccompanied women in strange places and start talking to them. And Paul was not really used to talking intimately with any women. He had been a religious leader before his conversion. He didn't often find himself like this, outside of the centers of power. Whoever he was expecting in Macedonia, it would not have been Lydia. She really was a most unusual woman, not fainting or obedient, not dependent on any man, defying all expectations of subservience and supporting herself. We don't know how she came to be an unmarried entrepreneur, but we know that she was strong and successful, and we know that she was deeply faithful. What must they both have thought, standing there as strangers? There is an entire world between them. Barriers of culture and gender and faith. What moved Paul to speak to Lydia that day? And what on earth moved Lydia to listen? From dye-stained fingers in Philippi to tattoo ink in Whitehorse, Yukon, and another group of strong women who are listening deeply to one another. A couple of weeks ago, many Inuit, Métis, and First Nations women from all over Turtle Island congregated at the Kwanlin Cultural Center for the Kwanlin Traditional Tattoo gathering, the first of its kind. Some of the women at this gathering were artists and apprentices, and others were women looking to be tattooed, and still more looking to learn just more about the practice of traditional face markings and how stick and poke traditional Indigenous tattoos work. Face markings play a huge part in Indigenous ancestry, especially among Indigenous women. And over the generations, they have been used to identify clans or house groups, indicate status, mark important life transitions, such as the onset of menstruation or childbirth. They have been given to offer protection or strength or healing or power. This tattoo gathering in Whitehorse is part of a huge movement to reclaim this cultural practice, which was widely lost due to colonialism, in large part due to Christians who identified the practice as pagan. And due to these colonial practices, residential schools, the 60s scoop, the potlatch ban, and so many others, Face markings faded away along with many other languages and traditions. And there are today so many gaps in the knowledge and the skills behind traditional face markings. And so Indigenous women across the North are fighting to get that tradition back. And so together in Whitehorse, the women learned and listened and poked. They poked faces hundreds and hundreds of times. And many women had their faces marked that weekend, and everybody learned the history and the meanings behind the so many types of markings that there are, and just the hundreds of different stories they represent, and what they mean to their ancestors. What strikes me as I read and listen to conversations about this gathering and the practice itself as I learn is just the deep transformative conversations that guide the work. It's sacred. This isn't your ordinary tattoo shop. I love tattoos, you know that, but this isn't the same ink that I get on my skin. Anne Spice was one of the artists that presented that weekend, and I had a chance to listen to her speak on a podcast called Transformative Marks. And Anne Spice says that when she started tattooing, she primarily worked as an artist in artistic spaces. But as her work grew, she was approached by workers in the health and wellness sector, hoping that she could shift her practice into that space. Because face markings, you see, are part of the larger conversation about healing and wholeness and wellness. And they have been an essential part of the response to Whitehorse's opioid crisis, for example, and many other issues of mental health and addiction. When Anne Spice tattoos, she talks deeply with her clients, and she asks them, what needs to be healed? What are you looking to change? And how do we mark that change? I'm paraphrasing her, but those are such amazing questions. Holly Nordlum is another artist who was at Kwanlin a couple of weeks ago, and she agrees. There's something so powerful, she says, about poking the skin and talking about hard stuff. Shared trauma, sexual abuse, substance abuse, all of these huge issues that have affected us for generations. Tattooing, face marking, is an act of reclamation and reconciliation. It's about belonging and identity and being connected to the women who came before. It's about marking moments of courage and bravery and healing. My good friend Alexia, she is a Nook from Iqaluit, she shared with me this week that she said, my markings give me power. And truly, she is one of the most powerful women that I know. I can scarcely imagine a more transformative act. And it's a practice that has been largely guarded and shepherded by women. The women hold the knowledge. They hold the painful space it takes to open yourselves up to one another in learning and vulnerability. And as they mark faces, they share stories and they share wisdom. And when those conversations are allowed to thrive, they are literally marked by the sacred experience of the whole thing. I think that sometimes we don't always notice these quiet guardians of faith and tradition, these matriarchs, these caregivers of our identities, so often overlooked as the men in charge fail to go to the water's edge, or fail to venture outside of the city gates, or fail to even notice them at all. Lydia, quietly, becomes the matriarch of the church in Philippi that day. But it's telling that by the time Paul writes his later letter to the Philippians, which is published later in the Bible, all mention of Lydia is gone. But the early church depended on the witness of so many faithful women. And the book of Acts is full of their names, and we hardly ever hear them. Tabitha and Junia and Eunice and Lois and Priscilla, Phoebe, Chloe, Aphia. How many strong, brave, open-hearted women have formed the foundation of our faith? How many brave and strong and open-hearted women have formed the foundation of our very united church? Some of them were trailblazers. Yes, Lydia Grucci, the first woman ordained in 1935, or Cindy Bourgeois, the first out trans woman ordained in the United Church. I went to school with her. Actually, the first ordained to any mainline Protestant denomination in the whole world. Other women, like my mother, my grandmother, probably yours too, they were quiet but no less crucial in the church's development. They served the United Church Women. They served the Women's Missionary Society before that. They fed congregations. They clothed refugees. They cared for the sick. They organized prayer chains. They knitted mittens and made banners to hang in sanctuaries and gave quilts at baptisms. Over 100 years, 1,000 years, countless generations, the open hearts of women have loved us into being and nurtured us to wholeness. And they mark us with that quiet stewardship of our faith and our traditions and our cultures and our identities. They change us by who they are. At the water's edge outside Philippi, an amazingly brave conversation ensues. And my favorite part of this story is that we don't actually have any of Paul's words. All the words spoken in the story are spoken by Lydia. We can imagine that Paul begins to preach, to tell Lydia and the women about Jesus and the resurrection and about the good news. We've heard some of these speeches before. We don't actually know because the only words that we hear are from Lydia. First, she asks to be baptized, and then she says, "If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come and stay at my home. If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come and stay at my home." And they do. And Lydia's home, which is full of purple cloths and covered in dye stains, becomes the center of the church in Philippi. It is the place where everything happens. And we are told that God opens Lydia's heart that day. And she eagerly, faithfully responds. Lydia, the purveyor of cloth, not the powerful men who bought her clothes, but the woman with stained fingers who dyed it for them. God opens Lydia's heart and fills her with the Spirit. God lifts Lydia up to leadership. The church at Philippi was the first Christian ministry to be founded by women and to operate in a woman's home. And once again, in the story of the early Christian church, in the story of our whole faith life, the women change everything. And it's not surprising at all that women ran the show because that's how God's kingdom works, actually, when it's working the way it should. In God's kingdom, it is the servants, not the served, who hold status. It is the ones outside the city gates who are put at the center. It is the woman, so often overlooked, the women who are chosen as the worthy recipients of grace and good news. Think about it. Women were the first to proclaim the resurrection. Women are among the first to be baptized, and they receive the gift of the Holy Spirit among them. And that day, it's not just Lydia who is changed. And it's not just Lydia who changes everything. Paul is transformed that day too. Paul's heart is opened, and his mind is as well. And he learns that he has to look beyond the centers of religious power. He has to look to the edges, and that's where Jesus ministered the most. And after Lydia's baptism, the very next thing that happens in Philippi is that Paul rescues a slave girl from her unjust masters, and he is thrown into prison over it. I wonder if he ever would have even noticed that girl if it wasn't for his experience with Lydia and the women. And later, when an earthquake breaks Paul and Silas's chains in jail, and there are only 2 houses in Philippi left standing, the house of the jailer who freed them, and, you guessed it, Lydia's house. So Paul goes to stay with Lydia once more, basking in the church before leaving Macedonia for good. And the Philippians carry on in Lydia's living room, baptizing and sharing supper and praying and singing and being Christians together. The women in Kwanlin done, the women of Philippi, Paul and Silas and us. From our Christian story to the thousands of sacred stories that came before our story, for every one of us, the healing, transformative Spirit of God leaves her mark on us. In Christianity, our markings are not on our faces, but they are marks all the same. The fish, the little ichthys that marked all the Christian houses and surely marked Lydia's home that day. The visible symbols of water, wine, and wheat, which are our sacraments. Those are God's love and promise made visible in the tangible things of everyday life. These are our marks as Christians. We are transformed by the work of the Spirit, and it touches each one of us here today, and it changes us, and it marks us. God opens Lydia's heart. God opens our hearts too, because when we are brave enough to listen to one another, when we are brave enough to be vulnerable with one another, when we are marked by what we hear or allow ourselves to be transformed by one another, that is when the Holy Spirit comes into our lives and changes everything. We are marked and transformed by that grace. God calls us to know each other and to notice each other and to receive good news from the least likely messengers among us. So we ask ourselves today, are we going to be brave enough to hear them now, today, and for the next 100 years of our faith life together? As a church, we stand on Lydia's shoulders. We stand on the shoulders of so many women who have formed us. And so today, just for a few minutes, we're going to write her back into our story. Her stained fingers remind us that even while history might have moved on from Lydia, she can never be erased. And we ask that we too may bear the marks of such a great faith. Can I speak to one of the men? Sure, but that's not who's in charge here. That power belongs to the Spirit who works within each one of us to heal us, to ignite us, and to make us whole. May it be so. Amen.